It's kind of nice to be back. Today, we just want to give you a little heads up on a couple things today. Summer Sunday school classes begin. The kids will meet downstairs in this building, age 3 to 5th grade. That'll be downstairs. Adult classes will meet in the other, in the building, over in the Ed building. And the schedule for those is in your bulletin. Today, I'm going to be talking about Islam and just address that. And I mean, there could be a 4 or 5 part series probably. I'm going to try to condense it all in one message. So just try to whet your appetite for the class. And it's a very challenging issue. So we'll see how that goes today. Also, we have a card for list downs on the back table. If the list was in a little bit of an automobile mishap here just a few days ago, broke a collarbone, got some bruises, got banged up, probably could have been worse. So we're going to send a card to list. So please sign that before you get out of here today. This week, Harvest of Talents garage sale, Thursday and Friday. If you have items for the garage sale, bring them in Thursday from 9 to 6. It's what?
Wednesday from 9 to 6.
What did I say?
You said Thursday.
I said, okay, the garage, thank you. The garage sale is Thursday and Friday, but bring your items in for the garage sale Wednesday, 9 to 6. Okay, yeah, thanks for the correction. Very good. Okay, or you can call Robbie Dish, and her phone number is in the center section of the bulletin here. Now, a couple weeks ago, we introduced something called Home Point. And we took a little appraisal of the congregation to kind of see where everyone was about being intentional at home. And part of that appraisal was a little slip called My 120-Day Plan. And we didn't belabor it, we didn't talk a lot about it, but we were encouraged, everyone was encouraged to be strategic and intentional about your 120-day plan at home. So just check it. How many of you did that? You don't have to raise your hand, but just check it. Anybody do that? How's it going? I think probably you're looking at me like, oh yeah. Okay, so that's fine, and we kind of expected that, but we want to just keep it in front of you and just give you a heads up. 2 weeks from today, we'll be kind of launching our first 120-day plan, okay, that utilizes the Home Point resources, okay? That'll be 2 weeks from today. And we'll start at least one message or maybe a series on being intentional at home, okay? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our worship team. I'll see you again in a little bit.
I would suppose, if you're all normal, you've had some issues in the last week or 2 weeks, or a little bit of difficulty in your life at all? Anybody have any kind of difficulty other than me? Like our well filling up with growing water, things like that, basement getting water. Anyway, there's a word, I'm going to share a scripture before to help you focus on worship this morning. You know, there's always difficulty in every life. There's a word in the Old Testament, and we've heard it lots of times about, you know, be still and know that I'm God. That word be still means to cease striving. But it literally means not, you know, to cease striving so hard. But, you know, lots of times when we're in difficulty, we put up our hands. You know, if you're in a conflict with somebody else, and automatically your hands come up for protection, or if you fall, your hands go out for protection. So you're trying to protect yourself with your hands. And the word cease striving means to drop your hands. Completely drop them. And let God intervene in your situation without any help from you at all. So this morning, as you worship and pray, drop your hands. Cease striving. Let the God of Jacob come and intervene in your life. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in all the earth. The Lord Almighty is with you. The God of Jacob is your fortress. Let's praise him this morning. We bring the sacrifice of praise.
We bring the sacrifice
Teach my soul to rise to you when temptation
You go before us. You're behind us. You surround us with your righteousness. Step in, O Lord, as we trust in you, and do battle for us. We thank you that you are our Savior, our rescuer, our Redeemer. I can't claim fame on much of what I'm going to tell you. It's a lot of it's borrowed from a very famous man named Max Lucado. And he is, of course, a prolific writer. And this comes from something that he wrote called When God Whispers Your Name. And that's, I guess, what sometimes I think a lot about this word, that we need to listen. Because sometimes God is speaking to us a lot, but he's whispering, not shouting. Just the kind of how he is. But I ran across this, and it kind of caught my attention because Paul always catches my attention, and he just said that I learned the secret of being happy at any time in everything that happens. It's hard to imagine when he wrote those words, because he wrote those words when he was in confinement in prison. And I think we have to take a look at, Paul sometimes, because we see him raised to this sainthood, and we think of him as someone that, what a strong, courageous, powerful leader. But sometimes maybe not. Peer into that prison cell, if you would, in your imagination. If you can see an old Roman dungeon, they're nothing like our jail cells here on earth now, unless you go to a third world country like Mexico. One time, my wife and I found ourselves in a jail similar to the one Paul was in. There are dirt floors. They have bars on the walls. There is no sanitary anything. There is no running water. There's no place to go to the bathroom. You go in the corner and you sleep and live in very unsanitary conditions. So let's picture that Paul is there in that kind of a prison, shackled to the arm of the Roman guard. And behold, the apostle of God, dead broke, no family, no property, nearsighted, and completely worn out. He doesn't look like a hero, does he? Doesn't look like Iron Man, Superman, Spider-Man, all of the superheroes and everything we have going on all around us that cause someone to be great. Paul doesn't look like a hero. He doesn't sound like one either. He introduced himself as the worst sinner in history. He was a Christian killer before he was a Christian leader. At times his heart was so heavy, his pen drug itself across the page, and he penned this line in Romans 7:24 that says, "What a miserable man I am. Who will save me from this body of death?" I felt that way. You ever felt that way? Who's going to save me from this place I am, the situation I'm in, the conditions I'm in, the state I'm in, the need that I am in? Only God knows how long Paul contemplated that before he wrote the next sentence. I thank God for saving me through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Hear his whisper this morning as we remember him. I'm here to rescue and save you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Father, as my mind works in thinking on this first song, we bring a sacrifice to you. And then your Holy Spirit spoke to me and said, it's not a sacrifice that we bring to you, it's an offering that we bring to you, and it's freely given. No one knows, no one gives the amount other than your word speaks of what to give. And it also says to speak, or to give with a joyful and give freely. Otherwise you don't even want it. So Lord, I thank you this morning that we are able to come and worship you. I thank you that we are able to come and freely give back to you. It's an honor and a privilege to be a Christian in this day and age and to know what we know. Thank you that you guide our lives, and ask that you would bless this offering now. In Jesus' name.
Problems. Not all Muslims are terrorists, but all terrorists are Muslim. To many others who have a clue or read and understood the Quran, it's exactly the opposite.
It is a peaceful religion, but these other people have a whole political agenda, and I don't understand it. It's horrifying. Something that has been such a very positive in my life is now being portrayed as a training ground for mindless maniacs, really, who don't care who they murder.
Nevertheless, despite pundits and politicians alike continuously failing to see the difference between Islam and its radical offshoots, this religion is expanding at a fast pace.
There's still no exact statistics as to how many Muslims are there in the United States. Some statistics say it's 4 million, some double that figure. What's undeniable is the rapid growth of Islam in the country. Only 10 years ago, there were only 50 Islamic schools across the nation. Now this number stands at 200. The same applies to Islamic centers. This number has tripled over the last 2 decades.
And to a certain extent, Islam can credit converts for its growth. But if this religion is evil, as some believe, why would people growing up in other environments want to join it?
My attraction to Islam had to do with just what I had learned about the scriptures. My curiosity increased, and I started to investigate Islam. I found it to be something that I wanted to learn more about.
We spent a day with a convert to find out.
I pray here, I pray everywhere in the house.
Robert McGough is what you would call a genuine white American. In fact, his family's presence in the United States dates back 4 centuries.
So you have this piece of art, basically, centerpiece in your apartment, right?
Well, Islam is the centerpiece of my life.
Nevertheless, 9 years ago, Robert made a life-changing decision.
I was raised Christian, and I always liked the idea of monotheism. When I learned about Islam and how it has a monotheistic focus very similar to Judaism, but it has a place for Jesus as a respected prophet, it clicked.
One of the more pleasant parts of being a Muslim to Robert is going to mosque prayers. It's here, he says, that the true nature of Islam is being revealed.
They say in America the most segregated hour is Sunday in America when people go to church, but here it's quite different. There are peoples from every corner of the world meeting each other, praying with each other, living their lives, marrying into each other's families.
So it's massively different to what you experienced in the childhood going to a Catholic church.
It definitely is a cultural shift.
And are you enjoying this kind of shit?
I very much enjoy it. I think that the community presence, the will to engage, the different stories we can tell, it makes a special communal experience.
Robert's affinity towards Islam transformed into his professional life.
This is the national office, just several blocks from Capitol Hill.
He now works for the Council on American Islamic Relations, or CARE, providing legal help to Muslims in peril. Needless to say, with the rise of Islamophobia in the United States, Robert and his colleagues have been busy.
Anti-Muslim rhetoric on the campaign trail is mainstreaming Islamophobia. And that's actually translating into acts of discrimination or hate crimes on the ground. An unidentified sender had mailed to our national office and our Bay Area office in California a package with white powder. Thankfully, it was inert. We're constantly under threats, but we remain undeterred. I think that this only inspires us to work harder. We're a lightning rod that attracts this type of hate, but we understand that the whole community is under a similar threat.
The notion you would often hear from Muslims in America these days. They acknowledge that thanks to those committing atrocities while associating themselves with Islam, the whole religion is being put into crosshairs. But just as their book, the Quran, teaches them, they're sure that adversity will eventually make way for the bright future. Alexei Rashevsky, RT, reporting from Washington, D.C.
Okay, thanks to our worship team today. Thanks, Lynn, and your team. Thanks to our volunteers in the booth, and thanks to our servers for your ministry. Thanks for taking surprises in stride. So, well, all stories have a beginning. You know, we all sat on our parents' lap at one time, or maybe our grandparents or an aunt or an uncle, and they opened a book and they began a story, they began to read a story, and it usually started something like this. Once upon a time, there was a man. Once upon a time, there was a princess. Once upon a time, there was a family. And for the past 30 or, well, actually almost 40 years, there's been a series of movies called Star Wars, and every single movie starts a long, long ago in a galaxy far, far away. And that the once upon a time of Islam, the beginning of the story of Islam is a man that lived about 4,000 years ago. And that man is the one common denominator between Christianity and Islam. His name is Abraham. If you have your Bibles, turn with me to Genesis chapter 12. We're going to start there today, and we'll hit some things in the New Testament later on, but I'm going to start in Genesis 12. Today, I want to give you the background of the story of this religion of Islam. And my goal is to kind of give you an appetizer towards the class that our friend Rick Geisler is going to teach beginning this morning at 9:30 in room 401. I want to kind of pique your interest. And if you're not interested already, okay, kind of pique your curiosity. I think we have a natural kind of interest and curiosity with this religion that's becoming this a real force in the world, some would say threat. And at the end, we'll make some application, okay? Now, Abraham was chosen by God. Don't know why God chose Abraham. He was living in the Middle East as an idol-worshipping pagan, kind of like the rest of the people in that time in the Middle East. Maybe Abraham was more of a questioning or curious kind of person. Maybe he was more open or trusting or seeking. But at any rate, God spoke to him, and God made a promise to him. This is in Genesis chapter 12, verse 2. You've probably seen this before. We'll put these verses on the screen. God said, I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. Which is, how many of you have heard of Abraham before we came in here today? Almost all of us, okay? So God promised Abraham, I'll make your name great. And here, 4,000 years later, we all heard of him before we came in here today. Verse 3. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Now, if you remember, at this time, Abraham was kind of getting up in years, and he had no children yet with his wife Sarah, and time passed, and Abraham was having a conversation with God. How's this going to happen? And his wife Sarah at this time said, well, okay, you have this God who's talking to you, telling you that you're going to make you a great nation. Listen, I've got an idea. Why don't you go have a child with my servant? Maybe that's the way God is going to fulfill his promise. So, good Abraham wanted to keep his wife happy. That's what he did. But that caused jealousy and tension between his wife Sarah and her servant Hagar, the Egyptian. And so Hagar packed up and left. And so she's running. She's running from Sarah, and God spoke to Hagar. Hey, where are you going? And Hagar says, I'm running away. I can't take it anymore. He says, I want you to go back and submit to Sarah. Turn over to Genesis 16. Here's what God says to Sarah or Hagar. Genesis 16, verse 10. The angel of the Lord also said to her, that's Hagar, you are now with child, and you will have a son, and you shall name him Ishmael. For the Lord has heard of your misery. That's verse 11, isn't it? Okay. Go to verse 12. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. He will live in hostility towards all his brothers. Words of prophecy from the angel of the Lord. And then later on in Genesis chapter 21, God said to Abraham, I am going to make your son Ishmael into a great nation also. And just a few years later, Sarah gave birth to a son named Isaac, which was the beginning of the Jewish nation, and through whom this promise of God would be fulfilled, that all nations of the world would be blessed through you. And scholars agree Ishmael was the beginning of the Arab nations. And the prophecy about him was correct. There was conflict between Ishmael and between his younger brother Isaac, and which was the beginning of the conflict in the Middle East we see today between the Arabs and the Jews. So centuries passed as the fulfillment of the promise of God was given to Abraham. Jesus Christ was born, he lived, he died, he rose again from the dead, he ascended to heaven. His story and his spirit began to spread through the Middle East and through the Roman Empire. And in the 4th century AD, the Emperor Theodosian made Christianity the state religion. And in the land of Palestine, many Jewish people continued to adhere to the law of Moses and the prophets, or the Old Testament, as their truth. And so Christianity kind of had a prophet, Jesus, and a book, the New Testament. The Jews had prophets and a book, the Old Testament. The descendants of Ishmael mostly lived on the Sinai Peninsula, which was today as we call Saudi Arabia. And they were aware that there was, a Jewish faith, and they were aware that there was a Christian faith, but they didn't have a messenger or a book or a prophet. And as the Roman Empire dissolved, other forms of central government emerged in Europe. But in Arabia, there was no unity, and there was no government. There were mostly desert tribes that had their own gods, and they did business with each other, and they fought with each other, a lot like we see in the Old Testament times. And while there was mostly peace between Christians in that region and the Arabs, there was a sense among the Arab people that God sort of left them out. He had not spoken to them as a people. That, a few Arabs converted to Christianity, but most Arabs saw Christianity as a Jewish or a European religion. And then in the 7th century AD, that began to change. An Arab businessman named Muhammad Abdullah claimed to have heard some messages from the angel Gabriel. And Muhammad couldn't read, he couldn't write. He recited these messages to his wife and cousin, and they wrote them down, which was the beginning of what we now known as the Quran. And as time went by, Muhammad began to talk openly about these revelations, and he began to attract a following. See, and depending on what you read, and depending on how you interpret history, Muhammad's intent didn't seem to be to start a new religion. He believed he was a prophet of God to the Arab people, just like Jesus was a prophet to the Christian people, and Moses was a prophet to the Jewish people. Because in his mind, in Muhammad's mind, what he was hearing was from the same God that inspired the Old Testament and the New Testament. It was all from the same God. And there was no difference between the God of Jews and the God of Christians and the God that he heard from. And in his mind, there was no thought to convert Christians or Jews to his way of thinking, but the pagan, idol-worshipping Arabs of his day. Because what he was hearing from God, as he thought, what he thought was from the same God as the Jewish and Christian God. And it didn't conflict with Arab thinking. See, even though Arabs believed in many gods, they believed that there was a supreme God over all the other gods. His name was Allah. And a series of messages straight from Allah immediately began to get the attention of many of the Arabic people. Here's a quote. I want to give you a quote from the Quran. It refers to Christians, probably Jews. It shows that Muhammad didn't see Judaism and Christianity as in competition with what he was hearing. Here's the quote from the Quran. It says, "Do not argue with the followers of earlier revelation," speaking of the Old Testament and the prophets, the Jewish prophets in the New Testament. "Otherwise, than in a most kindly manner." In other words, you can have some friendly debate, but don't be unkind to these people. "We believe that which has been bestowed from on high upon us, as well that which has been bestowed upon you," speaking to Jews and Christians, "for our God and your God are one and the same, and it is unto him that we surrender ourselves." See, Muhammad believed that the messages that he was hearing were part of the Jews and the Christians, but they were from the same God that they had heard from. Now, what's interesting, at that time, this Muhammad began to preach repentance and prayer. He lived in Mecca. You can see Mecca on the map here. Mecca, as you can see, it's kind of in bold type there, right in the middle of Saudi Arabia, kind of on the east shore of the Red Sea. He lived in Mecca at that time. And his followers, when they began to bow in prayer, like we saw just a minute ago in the video, they bowed toward Jerusalem. Because Jerusalem was the holy city. Everybody recognized that in the Middle East. Jerusalem was the holy city. Jerusalem was the area where Abraham had been given the promise from God. Jerusalem was the place where Jesus had done his ministry. Jerusalem was the connection between this region of the Middle East and God and the revelations of God. And again, in the mind of Muhammad, what he was hearing was an extension of what God had revealed to other two groups. So, and see, much of what Muhammad preached was injustice, because there were a lot of poor people, and there was a poor segment of the population, and there was a very elite rich segment of the population, and these elite rich didn't seem to have much compassion on the poor. They showed no compassion. And so a lot of what Muhammad preached was injustice, of the rich ignoring the poor, and judgment to come upon the rich. Well, that attracted a following, as you might guess, from all the poor people and kind of the have-nots in the area. But there were a group of people that Muhammad was not popular with. As you might guess, it was the rich people in Mecca. And so they put a lot of pressure on him, and a few years later, he left Mecca and he moved north to Medina. See, Medina is just north of Mecca, or it's marked with the red flag there on the map. He moved north a couple hundred miles to Medina, where he met some friendly Jewish people, and he became friends with them. And it was here, apparently, that Muhammad got acquainted with the Old Testament scriptures. And in this, he discovered what we just looked at a minute ago. He discovered that there was a connection, there was a family connection to the Jews. There was that Father Abraham was the ancestor of all of us, because it was common knowledge that Ishmael, the son of Abraham, was the father of the Arab nations. And so this was great news to Muhammad, because all of a sudden they were connected. And now, hey, we can all be one big happy family under the one true God all together. Well, the Jews in Medina and the Christians in Medina didn't think so. They didn't agree with Muhammad. And so as Muhammad began to mix his revelations with the Old Testament stories and the Old Testament teaching and the New Testament, the Jews and the Christians were offended. They said, I don't think so. We don't accept you as a prophet of God. And so by 624 AD, Muhammad's following had grown, and one day during prayer, a significant thing happened. As you read history of this, instead of bowing toward Jerusalem, Muhammad's followers said, today we're going to do something different. We're going to bow toward Mecca. Significant change in direction. Because that represented a break from Jewish teachings and from Christian teachings. And it was a sign, it was kind of a monumental decision, a choice, that say, now we're our own people. We're our own religion, and the holy city of holy cities, is not Jerusalem, but Mecca. Now, another significant thing took place in Medina. Because many people in Medina were poor, they didn't farm, Muhammad began to lead groups of men in raids on caravans of rich people that came through that area. Now, again, you have to kind of interpret history a little bit. This is interesting. At that time, raids on the caravan, caravans through the desert on camel and so forth, and donkeys, it wasn't seen as a crime like train robbery was seen as a crime in the early United States. Okay? It was a crime, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, they robbed trains, they were outlaws, they got chased all the way to South America. Okay? raiding caravans in that time and place was more like a sport. There were rules to this. You couldn't kill anybody, you couldn't hurt anybody. And so Muhammad developed into a very, very good leader at raiding caravans, including caravans that were coming from Mecca, that were carried exports and so forth. Well, as you might guess, the Meccans didn't like that. And they began to send armed guards with their caravan, and eventually they organized an army because Muhammad was really good at this. He was really good at raiding caravans. And there was a confrontation, an army from Mecca of 10,000 troops, confrontation with an army that Muhammad raised up from Medina of only like 3,000 troops. And Muhammad and his 3,000 troops routed this 10,000 member army from Mecca. It was called the Battle of the Trench. And this victory put him in a brand new level, the status as a leader politically, militarily, and spiritually. Now, 3 years later, Mecca decides, we got to, so the raids continued. And the Meccans decided, we got to get rid of this guy Muhammad. So they put a bigger army together with a plan to overthrow and destroy Muhammad up in Medina. And Muhammad heard about this, and he put together a much bigger army. And before the Meccans could come up to Medina, he marched with his army to Mecca. And as soon as they saw the size of Muhammad's army, Mecca surrendered. They said, no, we don't want it. We don't even want to fight. We don't want any bloodshed. And so there was no battle fought. And Mecca welcomed Muhammad as leader. Well, he took down all the old pagan altars, all the shrines, and Mecca became the capital of the religion of allegiance to Allah. And now there was unity in the Arab world around a leader. There was unity around an ideology and a religion. And then 2 years later, for reasons that we're not sure, that it's not clear from history, Muhammad died at the age of 62. And there was, a lot of different stories, a lot of versions about his death and what happened and all so forth. But we know that he died at age 62. Now, as you might guess, after the death of Muhammad, Islamic people were divided in who should lead a movement from here, because this movement had a lot of momentum. And who should lead? Should it be, well, some people thought it should be a family member of Muhammad, his cousin, because it should be a bloodline, it should be royal, royal blood, there should be a relative that leads this thing. And another part of the population notices, no. Somebody from his army, an officer, a lieutenant, who has kind of come up from the ranks and demonstrated leadership and courage. And that divided the Arab people at that time. That division is still a division today. It's reflected in the Sunni and Shiite sects of Islam. And in the centuries that followed, Islam spread by trade and evangelism of this Islamic ideology throughout Europe and Asia. Now, that is really a brief background. That is very, very brief. Leaves out many, many details. It's just an outline of the life of this fellow Muhammad. You'll be able to get much more information in Rick's class to come. But let me give you 4 observations, just insights that I kind of pick up here, and then we'll make a couple applications and we'll let you go, okay? All right, 4 observations about this. Number 1, and this is probably obvious, there's a radical difference in the value systems of Muhammad and Jesus. There is a radical difference in the value systems of Muhammad and Jesus. Now, let me explain it this way. What both Muhammad and Jesus did lines up with what they said. Okay? What both Muhammad and Jesus did lines up with what they taught and said. For example, Jesus said, "I'm not come to be served, but to serve, and to give my life as a ransom for many." That's exactly what he did, right? And he said, "There's no greater love than this if you lay down your life for your friends." That's what he did. And see, Muslims also believe that Muhammad lived what he taught as well. And I think we can say, well, wait a second. A religious leader hearing from God, Muhammad murdered people. If you know the history of this is at all, Muhammad killed a lot of people. I mean, right about this time of the Battle of the Trench, there were some Jewish people around Medina that were kind of siding with the Meccans. He drove them out, he killed all the men, and he made the women and children slaves. I mean, wait a minute. How can anybody be a messenger from God and do that? Well, okay. We need to remember that in Old Testament times, Moses, Joshua, and David, they did things, they put people to death in ways we don't understand. Remember, from the Old Testament stories, we don't get that either. I mean, and historians will tell you, you always need to interpret a person's actions by the context in which they live, or the time and place in which they live. And that's true. We look at the actions of some of the Old Testament people, like Joshua and David, and Muhammad in the way he treated some of the Jewish people at that time, and we say, well, that's horrible. How could anybody that would fear God would do that to any other person? But Muslim scholars and historians would say, well, you can't judge any of those people by 21st century American standards. You have to interpret Muhammad's actions by the time and place in which he lived, and I agree. But let me add something. Jesus lived in the 1st century. So, whatever seemed appropriate for the context of the 7th century, okay, you follow me? Whatever seemed appropriate in terms of how we treat these people groups or these individuals, whatever was appropriate then was even more appropriate in the 1st century. That's just the way the ancient world was. In fact, there were several would-be messiahs before Jesus and after Jesus that used Muhammad's approach to revolution. They raised armies, they attacked the Romans, they declared the freedom of the Jewish people because they believed it was God's will for the Jewish people. But the way Jesus taught and the way Jesus acted didn't fit in any culture, anywhere. See, I've never heard of a culture where, where I have not come to be served, but to serve, and to give my life as a ransom. I've never known of a culture where that was a good idea. You know, or pray. What did Jesus say? Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. I've never heard or read of a culture where in the time and place you lived in, that's just what you did. I've never heard of a culture like that. Have you? The Jesus teaching and value system wasn't radical for the 1st century. It was radical for every century. Just last week when I was home, talking to one of my old friends, and we're talking about life, and we're talking about jobs, and we're talking about work and everything, and he said, if you be nice to people, if you're nice to people, you're going to get run over. See, Jesus' value system and what he taught and the way he acted doesn't fit here either. Because I think a lot of people think like my friend does. Which sets Jesus apart from Muhammad. And it sets Jesus apart from every other historical figure. Yeah, we should consider Muhammad's actions in light of the world and the culture in which he lived. But we don't have to do that with Jesus Christ. He stands alone in what he taught, and what he did. So that's the first thing. There's a radical difference in the systems of the value systems of Muhammad and Jesus. Here's a second observation. The Quran reflects the teachings of only one person. Okay, the Quran was written it reflects the teachings in the inside of one person alone, Muhammad. It was compiled from the revelations and the messages and teachings from just him. Whereas the Bible, especially the Old Testament, the Old Testament and New Testament together had almost 40 authors from various backgrounds, various time areas that all tell one story. We've said that, we've talked about that before. So comparatively speaking, the Quran is much a narrower thing than the Bible. The Quran could be compared to maybe with the book of Isaiah or maybe the book of Psalms, the perspective of a single writer. So that's just a point of comparison. Here's the third observation. This is significant. In the Islamic belief system, heaven is earned, but it's never certain. In the Islamic belief system, heaven is earned, but it's never certain. See, within the beliefs of Islam, heaven is something you earn by adhering to something called the 5 pillars. Maybe you've heard about that, the 5 pillars or the 5 tenets of Islam, which is number 1, you believe, you accept Allah as the one true God and Muhammad as his prophet. 2, you give alms or gifts to the poor. You're generous with the poor. 3, you have daily prayer, as we saw in the video. 4, you fast. You do some fast during the festival of Ramadan. And 5, if you're able to, financially, you make a pilgrimage. You make a personal trip to Mecca. And if you're faithful to those 5 main pillars, you might go to heaven. But Allah is the final judge. And what he says goes, and at the end of your life is kind of weighed on a balance. You can imagine a scale. And it's determined, if you go to heaven, by how your life weighed out. Now, in my mind, okay, this is just my perspective. To me, that's the great deception of Islam. If I could be so bold. To me, that's the great deception of Islam. That, look, all you have to do these 5 things and you can earn salvation. To me, that is the big deception of Islam. Because as, you know, we believe something totally opposite of that. We can't earn heaven on our best day. And we have to be in a relationship with God only by His grace through faith, not by pillars. Right? Okay, so to me, that's the big deception of Islam. Here's another passage from the Quran that kind of substantiates this. I want to this is interesting. This is Quran, the 23rd chapter. It says, then those whose balance is heavy, in other words, with the 5 pillars, if you can, again, picture a balance, they will attain salvation. But those whose balances are light, those will be those who have lost their souls. In hell, they will abide. So in Islam, you have to earn your salvation. And you just live your life the best you can and hope Allah is just and merciful, with the one exception. If you suffer, or if you suffer for a time for the Prophet Muhammad or for the cause of Islam, or if you die in service to Islam or the Prophet Muhammad, your sins are automatically forgiven. Your sins are automatically blotted out. If you suffer intensely, and there's other passages in the Quran that say that we don't have time to look at those this morning. But if you die in service to Muhammad or Islam, then Allah automatically blots out your sin. And you know what was interesting about 9/11? As those stories came to light, some of those guys that got on those planes on September 11th, 2001, they had done some strange things the night before. The day before, they saw some things that no good Muslim would see. They put things in their body that no good Muslim would put in their body. They were exposed to things that no good Muslim would be exposed to. Kind of a mystery. I mean, you think, these people are so adhering to Allah and to this cause, why would they even do that? Maybe that's the answer. Because what they were about to do was so heroic on the Islamic scale that all of their, thing they did the night before would be forgotten by Allah and they would be admitted into paradise. Which is kind of dark. It's kind of disturbing, right? It should be. But before we go judge all those people, let's look at our 4th observation. There is a convicting similarity in the histories of Islam and of Christianity. Now, Islam is about 1,400 years old. It began about 1,400 years ago. Now, when Christianity was 1,400 years old, do you know what was happening? The Crusades. People, in the name of Jesus, put armies together to ride on the Holy Land and kill just about anyone who got in their way. Pope Urban II made a speech in France, this famous speech, that was credited with inspiring the First Crusade. And when it inspired people to sell their possessions and their farms, and they raised armies, and they rode to the Holy Land, and they killed thousands of Arabs, and they killed thousands of Jews. And the legend is with the Crusades that the blood ran ankle deep in the streets. and the bodies of the Arab people were piled so high they didn't know what to do with them. Disease broke out and even killed some of the Crusaders themselves. And people were just killed randomly. Jews, Arabs, Muslim, just because they lived in Palestine. In the name of Jesus. Here's the quote from the Pope's speech that is, again, this is credited for inspiring the first crusade. It says, God himself will lead them, for they will be doing his work. Does this sound familiar at all? See, does this sound familiar? There will be absolution and forgiveness of sins for all who die in the service of Christ. Really? Here they are poor and miserable sinners. There they will be rich and happy. Let none hesitate. They must march next summer. God wills it. Which, if you know anything about the Crusades, that was the battle cry of the Crusaders. God wills it. When Christianity was about 1,400 years old, there was another event just around the corner in history in the near future that was almost as bad as the Crusades, something called, we know as the Spanish Inquisition. That Spain was a Christian nation under Ferdinand and Isabella. Maybe you remember the story. And they made a deal with the Pope. And they were given permission to torture Jews and Muslims and Christians to see whether or not they were really Christians. The point is this. In both belief systems, there were periods of time when the spiritual values of each religion were hijacked, leveraged to accomplish things that neither founder of those belief systems would approve of or had in mind when they taught. Now, having said all that, again, we need to point out there's major differences in the theology of Christianity and Islam. Jesus didn't come to reform society. He came to reform the human heart. If you remember, Jesus wasn't much interested in the battles with the Romans. He just didn't pick that up, did he? He wasn't interested in politics. He was very interested in individuals. He came to reform the human heart, not by taking lives, but by giving his own life for the many. That whosoever will may come to God and become part of God's family, not by following a law, not by following pillars, but by grace through faith. And so, just to kind of wrap this, okay, now how do we respond to Islam today? Okay, now let's fast forward a little bit now. We've got the background, we've got some observations. Now what do we do with this today? And this is a complicated question, because it depends on how you see it. See, if we see Islam as Americans, okay, that's kind of one perspective. If we see Islam as Americans, on the one hand, well, the United States, it's a free country, right? There's this thing we call freedom of religion. Freedom of expression of religious beliefs. Well, that means Muslims have the right to their beliefs. If they live in this country, they move here, they become citizens, they have the right to practice their religion because this is a free country. But also, I think as Americans, we can also see Islam as a threat. And here's why. See, no doubt, there are large numbers of Muslims that want to live in peace before God. Now, people dispute that and say they're all a bunch of hypocrites. I don't buy that. When you hear Kareem Abdul-Jabbar talk about that he wants to live in peace, and when you talk to the missionaries who know Muslims personally, they will say, yep, there are a large segment of Muslims that want to live in peace before God. However, there are also some Muslims that are extremists, and they're terrorists. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar referred to them as maniacs. They carry a similar spirit to the Axis powers of the 1930s and 1940s, which is world conquest or death. And the only language they understand is war. And here's the thing. The extremists, the terrorists, will hide behind their peaceful brothers. They will take advantage of the presence of peaceful Muslims in this country to gain a foothold, to gain entrance into the country and hide behind them and gain support from them. They're very covert. And so do we have the right to defend ourselves? Yeah. As Americans, yeah. I have a sidearm. I do. I have a 9mm Ruger pistol. And I took a concealed carry class almost a year ago. Now, I don't have it on me, okay? I don't carry it. I haven't done that. I just wanted to be prepared, you know, just in case. And there are concealed carry and open carry classes happening right here in Rusk County. It's all over the country, but it's happening right here in our community. And we've had some conversations right here in the church with some people. You know, should we, you know, maybe we should carry here. You know, I'm not going to. I just don't think that I need to at this point in time. I think it sends a wrong message as a pastor of the church, you know, to have a pistol on my hip. I'm not going to do it. And I think some of you would be upset if I did. Okay? But now, remember Craig Nelson down in Black River Falls? He carries one. A little different environment in Black River Falls than it is in Ladysmith. A lot more crime stuff going on down there. And so, and we've had conversations. Should we have that here? Should we have someone here? And a couple people kind of talk like, yeah, I'm going to be prepared. And honestly, part of me breathes a little easier at the prospect, if someone came in with an AK-47 and say, okay, declare that Allah is God or you will die. That there might be people in here that would say, no, put it down or you're going to die. Part of me, I don't know if you agree with this, but part of me breathes a little easier because of that. I don't know, there's a whole bunch more of that discussion. Because as Americans, we want to defend our families, right? We want to defend our property and our real estate and our freedom. And there comes a time we need to stand up to evil, right? That's kind of an American perspective. But there's another way to see it. That's the Christian way. As Christ followers. That through the lens of the kingdom of God, Muslims are not just terrorists. They're lost and loved children of God. And they need the gospel. They need Christ. And they're not going to hear the gospel if we kill them. And they're not going to be attracted to Christ if we kick them out of the country. Now, there needs to be immigration laws. It needs to be enforced. I get all that. And may we defend our freedoms? Yes. But I think we have a higher allegiance. That's to Jesus Christ. Because remember what he said? If you take up the sword, you will what? You will perish by the sword. It just leads to, one pistol leads to a bigger pistol. And what did he say about your enemies? Love your enemies. Oh my gosh. This is terribly challenging. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. Now here's the thing. We have to decide. On the day that we come face to face with a Muslim, whether it's a peaceful Muslim or a terrorist, what are they going to see in us? Are they going to see an American that defends their turf and responds as appropriate from their context? Okay? Responds according to the appropriateness of the time and space in which they live. What will they see? Or will they see a Christ follower that carries immovable convictions, which includes unconditional love, and acts from within a value system from another world? Yeah, I think, it's my opinion, I think we may be coming to a time when we may have to choose between the two. And we may be coming to a time when we can't have both. I don't know. I'm just my horse sense that tells me this. But I think the bottom line is this: so as we all kind of have to figure this out for ourselves. Are we going to see this as Americans or Christians or Christian Americans, and it gets really confusing? I think our higher allegiance is to Jesus himself. And I don't know what that means. I don't know how that's going to shake out. I don't know. I couldn't tell you what's going to happen. But I think the bottom line is what we sang a few minutes ago. God, I need you. Really? Right. I mean, I need you every hour. I think this is the bottom line for us as Christians, because the world's not getting any better. It's getting worse by the day. It's getting more complicated, more desperate by the day. And I think God's people need to be on their knees so that we can see God's power come alive through His church, no matter what that means for us personally. So, would you stand with me? Again, a lot more could be said. So I have to kind of try to squeeze a lot of information into one message. And so there's probably things left unsaid. But I invite you to the class that Rick's going to teach here and start in about 15 minutes. And we can process this stuff a little more. That's where I'm going to be today, by the way. Right? Let's pray. Father in heaven, we live in a broken world. And I think there are days when we want to just kind of be insulated from that. We want to be insulated from the challenges. We just want to be nice people. And we want to just, we just want to live up to where we have a right to live in this country. We just want to be free. We just want to have our home. We want to work. We want to treat people decently. We want to enjoy life because that's what you meant for us. We just want to be kind of insulated from all these hard decisions and all the stress going on in the world. But there's a spiritual war happening, we acknowledge. And there's violent people, mean, ruthless people in the world that want to destroy our freedom, destroy this country. And so there's part of us that wants to respond to this whole thing as Americans and defend our turf. And we have the right to do that within our Constitution. God, I pray that all of us will see today that we really kind of have a higher allegiance, and that's to you and to your kingdom. Whatever that might mean, that we're called to love these people. I don't know what that means, but you do. To love these people and pray for them. And this is one of the highest challenges I think we'll ever face in this generation. Is what do we do with this group of people, with this ideology that started 1,400 years ago? As supposedly another revelation of you. Now what do we do with this? How do we respond to this? God, may we find ourselves on our knees, depending on you for our response. I pray this in Jesus' name. Everyone agreed and said?
Amen.
Amen. God bless you. Thank you for being here today.